Marcus Chen stepped off the military transport bus at Fort Braxton with his duffel bag slung over his shoulder and determination burning in his chest. The morning sun cast long shadows across the base as drill sergeants barked orders at formations of soldiers. At 22 years old, Marcus had dreamed of this moment since childhood, watching war movies with his grandfather who served in Vietnam. The first sign that his military experience would be different than expected came during the initial roll call. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a weathered man with cold grey eyes, read through the list of new recruits with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. When he reached Marcus's name, he paused and looked up with a smirk. "Chen, Marcus. Let me guess, another college boy who thinks the military is going to be like Call of Duty?" Rodriguez's comment drew snickers from some of the other drill instructors standing nearby. Marcus kept his eyes forward and responded with a crisp, "No, sir," but he could already feel the target being painted on his back. Over the following weeks, what started as typical military hazing evolved into something more personal and cruel. While other recruits were learning essential combat techniques and leadership skills, Marcus found himself assigned to endless kitchen duty, latrine cleaning, and equipment maintenance that seemed to serve no training purpose. Private Johnson, who bunked next to Marcus, noticed the differential treatment early on. "Man, they're really giving you the business," he whispered one evening as they cleaned their rifles. "Rodriguez has been making you do double shifts while the rest of us get actual training time." Marcus wiped down his weapon methodically, trying to hide his frustration. "I can handle it. Maybe they're just testing me harder because they see potential." But deep down, Marcus knew this wasn't normal military discipline. During field exercises, he was often left behind to guard equipment while his unit practiced tactical maneuvers. When he did participate, Rodriguez would find fault with everything he did, no matter how perfectly executed. The breaking point came during a weapons training session. Marcus had been practicing with the M4 rifle for hours, trying to perfect his marksmanship despite receiving minimal instruction. When his turn came at the range, he managed to hit the target consistently, grouping his shots better than many of the other recruits. Instead of acknowledgement, Rodriguez walked over and examined the target with exaggerated disappointment. "Pathetic, Chen. My grandmother could shoot better than this, and she's been dead for 10 years. The other instructors laughed, and Marcus felt his face burn with humiliation. That evening, Marcus sat alone in the mess hall, picking at his food while the conversations of other recruits buzzed around him. He thought about calling his parents, but what would he tell them? That their son, who had graduated summa cum laude from college, was being treated like a failure in the military? The psychological toll was becoming evident. Marcus had always been confident and outgoing, but weeks of constant criticism and isolation were wearing him down. He began second-guessing every action, every decision. Even simple tasks like making his bunk became sources of anxiety, knowing that Rodriguez would find something wrong with it. Private Williams, one of the few recruits who occasionally spoke to Marcus, approached him after chow one evening. "Hey Chen, you doing all right? You've been pretty quiet lately." Marcus forced a smile. "Just focused on training, you know." "Trying to prove myself." Williams frowned. "Prove yourself?" "Man, you've been working twice as hard as anyone else here. If anything, they should be proving themselves to you." But Marcus had internalized the constant criticism. He genuinely began to believe that maybe he wasn't cut out for military service. Maybe Rodriguez was right about him being just another college boy who couldn't hack it in the real world. The situation escalated during a night navigation exercise. The recruits were supposed to work in pairs to reach designated checkpoints using only compass and map. Marcus was paired with Private Thompson, a quiet kid from rural Montana who rarely spoke to anyone. As they moved through the darkened forest, Marcus tried to maintain the bearing Rodriguez had grudgingly provided him. But something felt wrong about the coordinates. According to his calculations, they were heading directly toward a restricted training area that had been clearly marked as off-limits during their briefing. "Thompson, I think we need to adjust our heading," Marcus said, studying his map under the dim red light of his flashlight. Thompson shook his head. "Rodriguez gave us specific coordinates. We follow orders, remember?" Marcus hesitated. Everything in his training told him to trust his instruments and his judgment, but months of having his decisions questioned had eroded his confidence. Against his better judgment, he followed Thompson toward what he was certain was the wrong destination. They ended up in the restricted area, triggering security sensors that brought military police racing to their location within minutes. The MPs were not pleased to find two recruits wandering around a classified training facility at midnight. The next morning, Marcus found himself standing at attention in Rodriguez's office, receiving what felt like the 1,000th dressing down of his military career. "Chen, you worthless piece of garbage," Rodriguez snarled, pacing behind his desk. "Not only did you fail the navigation exercise, but you compromised base security. How do you explain that?" Marcus stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. "Sir, the coordinates seemed incorrect. I questioned them, but I was told to follow orders." "Don't give me excuses, recruit. A real soldier would have found the right way." "A real soldier doesn't need his hand held through basic navigation." Rodriguez leaned forward. "Maybe the military isn't for people like you." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. People like you. He'd heard variations of that phrase his entire life. In college, when professors questioned whether he belonged in advanced courses, in job interviews where his qualifications were scrutinized more heavily than others, and now here, where he was supposed to be judged solely on merit and performance. After being dismissed from Rodriguez's office, Marcus walked slowly back to his barracks. Other recruits were engaged in afternoon training exercises, their shouts and laughter echoing across the base. Marcus had been assigned to inventory duty in the supply warehouse again. As he counted boxes of MREs and folded uniforms, Marcus reflected on his grandfather's stories about military service. His grandfather had spoken of brotherhood, of earning respect through dedication and skill, of becoming part of something larger than himself. Instead, Marcus felt more isolated than ever. The warehouse was quiet except for the occasional vehicle passing by outside. Marcus worked methodically, trying to lose himself in the mundane task. He thought about civilian life, about the engineering job offers he had turned down to join the military, about the future he had envisioned for himself in uniform. A knock on the warehouse door interrupted his thoughts. Marcus looked up to see Sergeant First Class Martinez, one of the few NCOs who hadn't seemed openly hostile toward him. Martinez was older than Rodriguez, with kind eyes and a reputation for being fair but demanding. "Chen, how's the inventory coming along?" Martinez asked, stepping inside the warehouse. "Almost finished, Sergeant. Should have it completed within the hour." Martinez nodded and walked among the shelves, seemingly inspecting Marcus's work. "You know, I've been watching your performance during training exercises, when you actually get to participate." Marcus wasn't sure how to respond, so he remained silent. "Your marksmanship scores are among the highest in your class," Martinez continued. "Your physical fitness test results are excellent. Your written examinations are consistently superior." He paused and looked directly at Marcus. "So why do you think you're spending so much time in warehouses instead of on training fields?" The question hung in the air. Marcus had wondered the same thing, but had convinced himself it was because he wasn't performing well enough. "I assumed I needed more improvement before advanced training, Sergeant." Martinez's expression grew serious. "Chen, let me ask you something. Do you think the military is a place where merit matters?" "Yes, Sergeant." "I believe it should be." "Should be or is?" Marcus considered his response carefully. "I want to believe it is, Sergeant." Martinez walked closer, lowering his voice. "Sometimes, Chen, the system doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Sometimes, good soldiers get overlooked or mistreated for reasons that have nothing to do with their capabilities." He paused. "But sometimes those soldiers get opportunities to prove what they're really made of." Before Marcus could ask what he meant, Martinez headed toward the door. "Finish up here and get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be an interesting day." That evening, Marcus lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling while his fellow recruits slept around him. Martinez's words replayed in his mind. An interesting day. What did that mean? He thought about his journey to this point, the decision to enlist despite having other options, the weeks of training that had become weeks of humiliation, the growing doubt about his place in the military. He thought about his grandfather's Purple Heart displayed proudly in his childhood home, and wondered if he would ever earn anything more than disappointment. As sleep finally began to claim him, Marcus made a silent promise to himself. Whatever tomorrow brought, he would face it with dignity. He would prove his worth, not to Rodriguez or anyone else, but to himself. He would honor the uniform he wore and the legacy of service he hoped to continue. The barracks settled into quiet, broken only by the occasional snore or shifting of bodies. Outside, the night watch continued their patrols, and the base prepared for another day of training, challenges, and for one recruit, the possibility of redemption. The alarm sounded at 0500 hours, just like every other day at Fort Braxton. Marcus rolled out of his bunk and began his morning routine. But something felt different in the air. The drill instructors seemed more energetic than usual, and there was an undercurrent of excitement among the staff that he couldn't quite identify. During morning formation, Colonel Harrison appeared on the parade ground, an unusual sight since the base commander rarely attended routine recruit activities. He was accompanied by several officers Marcus didn't recognize, their uniforms bearing insignia from different units and specializations. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez called the formation to attention, his voice carrying across the assembled recruits. Today, gentlemen, we have special visitors conducting evaluations for an advanced training program. Some of you will have the opportunity to demonstrate your skills in real-world scenarios. Marcus felt his heart sink. Another opportunity he would likely be excluded from. Another chance to watch from the sidelines as his fellow recruits advanced their careers. He had grown accustomed to disappointment, but it still stung every time. The following recruits will report to Building 7 for initial screening, Rodriguez announced, unfolding a sheet of paper. He began reading names, and Marcus listened to each one with growing resignation. Johnson, Williams, Thompson, Davis, all names he expected to hear. Chen, Marcus. The sound of his own name caught Marcus so off guard that he almost missed the dismissal. As the formation broke apart, several recruits patted him on the back with genuine surprise and encouragement. Even Johnson, who had witnessed months of Marcus's mistreatment, looked shocked. Maybe they finally realized they'd been wasting talent, Johnson whispered as they walked toward Building 7. Building 7 was typically used for administrative processing, but today it had been transformed into a series of testing stations. Officers sat behind tables with clipboards and evaluation forms, while various pieces of equipment were arranged throughout the large room. The atmosphere was serious and professional, a stark contrast to the often chaotic environment of basic training. Marcus and the other selected recruits were divided into groups and rotated through different stations. The first was a written examination covering military history, tactics, and current affairs. Marcus found himself relaxing as he worked through questions about strategic planning and international relations, subjects he had studied extensively in college. At the second station, a stern-faced major tested their knowledge of weapons systems and maintenance procedures. Marcus disassembled and reassembled an M4 rifle with precision, then moved on to demonstrate his familiarity with various sidearms and support weapons. The major made notes but gave no indication of his assessment. The physical fitness evaluation was next, but this wasn't the standard push-ups and sit-ups routine. Instead, recruits were asked to complete an obstacle course that tested agility, strength, and problem-solving under pressure. Marcus attacked each challenge methodically, using techniques he had developed during his solitary training sessions. As he climbed over a wall and sprinted toward the finish line, Marcus noticed Rodriguez watching from the sidelines. The drill sergeant's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that Marcus hadn't seen before, perhaps surprise, or maybe concern. The final station was the most intriguing. A captain with Special Forces insignia sat alone at a table with nothing but a single folder in front of him. When Marcus approached, the officer gestured for him to sit down. "Recruit Chen, I'm Captain Foster. I'm going to ask you some questions and I want you to answer honestly. This isn't about giving the right military answer. I want to know what you actually think." Marcus straightened in his chair, uncertain about this departure from normal military protocol. "You've been at Fort Braxton for 3 months. How would you assess your training experience?" The question was clearly a trap, but Captain Foster had emphasized honesty. Marcus considered his response carefully. "Sir, I believe I've learned valuable skills and discipline, but I also believe my training experience has been incomplete. I've spent more time on menial tasks than actual military training." Captain Foster made a note. "Why do you think that is?" "I'm not certain, sir. I've wondered if it's because I need additional development or if there are other factors involved." "What kind of other factors?" Marcus hesitated. This was dangerous territory, but the captain had asked for honesty. "Sir, I sometimes wonder if my treatment has been influenced by factors unrelated to my performance or potential." Captain Foster leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus intently. "Tell me about a time when you disagreed with an order or procedure." Marcus thought immediately of the navigation exercise that had ended in humiliation. "During a night navigation exercise, I was given coordinates that I believed were incorrect based on my map analysis. I expressed my concerns but was told to follow orders. We ended up in a restricted area. What did you learn from that experience? That I should trust my training and judgment, even when others question it. And that following orders blindly isn't the same as being a good soldier." Captain Foster scribbled more notes, then closed his folder. Thank you, Recruit Chen. You can return to your barracks. The rest of the day passed in a strange suspension of normal routine. The selected recruits were excused from regular training activities, leaving them to speculate about the morning's evaluations. Some of the other recruits peppered them with questions about what had happened, but the testing had been so diverse that it was difficult to explain. That evening, Marcus sat in the mess hall with Johnson and Williams, picking at his dinner while trying to process the day's events. I think it was some kind of special operations screening, Williams said between bites of meatloaf. Did you see those officers? Half of them had ranger tabs and that one captain was definitely special forces.
Johnson nodded. Makes sense.
They're probably looking for recruits to fast-track into advanced programs. The question is, which of us made the cut? Marcus remained silent. In his experience, getting his hopes up only led to disappointment. Better to assume he hadn't been selected and be pleasantly surprised than to expect success and face another crushing blow to his confidence. After dinner, Marcus returned to his barracks and tried to focus on cleaning his equipment and preparing for the next day. But his mind kept wandering back to Captain Foster's questions and the unusual tone of the entire evaluation process. Around 2100 hours, just as lights out was approaching, Sergeant Martinez appeared in the doorway of the barracks. Chen, report to Building 7 immediately. Full uniform. The other recruits looked up from their evening routines with curiosity and concern. Marcus quickly donned his dress uniform and followed Martinez across the darkened base. Building 7 was mostly empty now, with only a few lights illuminating the hallways. Martinez led him to a small conference room where Colonel Harrison waited along with Captain Foster and two other officers Marcus didn't recognize. One wore the uniform of the 82nd Airborne Division, while the other had insignia indicating intelligence specialization. Recruit Chen, please have a seat, Colonel Harrison said, his tone more formal than threatening. Marcus sat rigidly at attention, unsure what to expect from this late-night meeting. Chen, your performance today was exceptional across all evaluation categories, the colonel began. Your scores placed you in the top 5% of all recruits we've tested over the past year. Marcus blinked, certain he had misheard. After months of being told he was inadequate, this news seemed impossible. However, Colonel Harrison continued, we have some concerns about your training experience here at Fort Braxton. Captain Foster's interview raised questions about whether you've received appropriate preparation for advanced assignments. Captain Foster opened his folder and consulted his notes. Chen, you demonstrated excellent tactical knowledge, superior physical fitness, and strong analytical skills. But your confidence level seems unusually low for someone with your capabilities. The intelligence officer leaned forward. We've reviewed your training records, and there are some inconsistencies. Your written test scores and marksmanship results don't align with the performance evaluation submitted by your drill instructors. Marcus felt a mix of vindication and anxiety. Were they finally recognizing the treatment he had endured, or was this some kind of test? Sir, I've tried to perform to the best of my abilities regardless of the circumstances, Marcus said carefully. We know you have, the 82nd Airborne officer replied. The question is whether those circumstances have prepared you for what we have in mind. Colonel Harrison stood and began pacing behind the table. Chen, we're considering you for immediate transfer to a specialized training program. It's an accelerated track designed for recruits who show exceptional potential for leadership and advanced operations. Marcus struggled to process this information. After months of warehouse duty and kitchen patrol, he was being offered advancement. The program is demanding, Captain Foster added. It would mean leaving Fort Braxton immediately and beginning intensive training with hand-picked personnel from various elite units. The washout rate is significant, but, the intelligence officer continued, successful completion would fast-track you into assignments typically reserved for soldiers with years of experience. We're talking about real responsibility, real impact. Marcus looked around the table at the four officers watching him expectantly. This was the opportunity he had dreamed of when he enlisted, but it felt surreal after everything he had endured. Sir, may I ask why I'm being considered for this program? Colonel Harrison smiled slightly. Because sometimes, Chen, the military finds its best people in unexpected places. Your performance today proved that talent can survive even in adverse conditions. The room fell silent as Marcus considered his response. This was clearly a pivotal moment, not just for his military career, but for his entire future. He thought about his grandfather, about the months of humiliation he had endured, about the promise he had made to himself the night before. Sir, I'm honored by this opportunity, but I need to understand something first, Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. Will I be judged solely on my performance and potential in this program? Absolutely, Captain Foster replied. Merit-based evaluation is the foundation of everything we do. Marcus straightened his shoulders and looked directly at Colonel Harrison. Then yes, sir. I accept. The officers exchanged glances, and Marcus caught what looked like approval in their expressions. Excellent. You'll be transferred tomorrow morning. Report to the airfield at 0600 with your gear. A transport will take you to your new training location. As Marcus stood to leave, the intelligence officer called out to him. Chen, one more thing. This conversation is classified. You don't discuss this program or your selection with anyone, including your fellow recruits. Marcus nodded and saluted before following Sergeant Martinez back across the base. As they walked in silence under the stars, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Genuine excitement about his future. Back into barracks, his fellow recruits were already asleep. Marcus quietly gathered his belongings, being careful not to wake anyone. As he packed his few personal items, he thought about the strange journey that had led him to this moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of his abilities and determination. But tonight, for the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton, Marcus Chen fell asleep with a smile on his face and hope in his heart. The military transport aircraft lifted off from Fort Braxton at dawn, carrying Marcus toward an uncertain but promising future. Through the small window, he watched the base shrink below him until it disappeared entirely. 3 months of his life were now just a memory, but they had shaped him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The flight took him to a remote training facility in the mountains of Colorado, a place that didn't appear on any public maps. As the aircraft descended through low clouds, Marcus caught glimpses of an extensive complex built into the mountainside, with ranges, obstacle courses, and buildings designed for purposes he could only guess at. Stepping off the aircraft, Marcus was immediately struck by the difference in atmosphere. Instead of the hostile environment of Fort Braxton, he was greeted by Master Sergeant Williams, a different Williams than his fellow recruit, who welcomed him with professional courtesy and genuine respect. Chen, welcome to Camp Resolute. You're here because someone believes you have exceptional potential. Our job is to find out if they're right. Williams picked up Marcus's duffel bag and began walking toward the main complex. Fair warning, this program makes basic training look like summer camp, but if you can handle it, you'll emerge as one of the most capable operators in the military. The next 6 months became a blur of intensive training unlike anything Marcus had experienced. Instead of mindless repetition and menial tasks, every exercise was designed to challenge his intellect, physical capabilities, and leadership potential. He learned advanced combat tactics, intelligence gathering, foreign languages, and specialized skills that would have taken years to acquire through normal military channels. His fellow trainees were equally impressive. College graduates, former Special Forces operators seeking advancement, and hand-picked personnel from various elite units. For the first time since enlisting, Marcus felt like he belonged among his peers. The training was ruthless but fair. Instructors pushed every trainee to their limits, but they also provided the support and knowledge necessary to succeed. When Marcus struggled with advanced mountaineering techniques, his instructor spent extra hours helping him master the skills, rather than dismissing him as inadequate. Captain Torres, one of the program directors, became something of a mentor to Marcus. During their weekly evaluation meetings, she helped him rebuild the confidence that had been systematically destroyed at Fort Braxton. Chen, I want you to understand something, Captain Torres said during one particularly intense session. Your performance here has been outstanding, but I can see you're still holding back. You're second-guessing yourself, instead of trusting your training and instincts. Marcus nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. It's been difficult to adjust after my previous experience. I read your file from Fort Braxton, Torres said bluntly. What happened to you there was wrong, and it had nothing to do with your abilities. But if you let that experience define you, those people win. Don't give them that power. Her words resonated deeply with Marcus. Over the following weeks, he began to shed the defensive mindset that had protected him but also limited him. His performance improved dramatically as he learned to trust his judgment and assert his leadership abilities. The program's final exercise was a simulated crisis scenario involving multiple teams, complex objectives, and real-world consequences for failure. Marcus found himself selected as team leader for a critical phase of the operation. a role that would have been unimaginable during his time at Fort Braxton. The scenario involved rescuing hostages from a fortified compound while gathering intelligence and coordinating with multiple supporting units. As Marcus studied the intelligence reports and terrain maps, he felt the familiar analytical calm that had served him well in college and earlier training. "All right, team," Marcus addressed his 5 teammates, all of whom had more military experience than him. "Based on the intelligence, I believe our best approach is a coordinated assault from multiple angles, but we need to prioritize the intelligence gathering objective." The team listened respectfully as Marcus outlined his plan, asking thoughtful questions and offering suggestions. This collaborative environment was everything he had hoped military service would be. The exercise went flawlessly. Marcus's team not only accomplished all objectives, but did so with a level of coordination and efficiency that impressed the evaluators. As they debriefed afterward, Marcus realized he had found his place in the military, not as someone who blindly followed orders, but as a leader who could analyze complex situations and guide others towards success. Graduation from the program came with multiple offers for advanced assignments. Marcus chose a position with a joint intelligence task force that would allow him to use both his analytical skills and newly developed operational capabilities. But before beginning his new assignment, Marcus had one final surprise waiting for him. "Chen, report to the command center immediately," came the announcement over the facility's public address system. It was his last day at Camp Resolute, and Marcus assumed this was routine out-processing paperwork. Instead, he found Master Sergeant Williams standing beside a secure video terminal, displaying the seal of the Department of Defense. On the screen was a familiar face, Colonel Harrison from Fort Braxton. "Congratulations, Sergeant Chen," Colonel Harrison said, emphasizing Marcus's new rank. "Your performance at Camp Resolute has been exceptional. More importantly, your entire experience has made you exactly the kind of leader the military needs." Marcus stood at attention, still uncertain about this unexpected communication. "Chen, I have an unusual request," the colonel continued. "We have a situation at Fort Braxton that requires someone with your specific qualifications and experience. There are systemic problems in the training program that need to be addressed by someone who understands them firsthand." Master Sergeant Williams stepped forward. "What Colonel Harrison is asking, Sergeant Chen, is whether you'd be willing to return to Fort Braxton as an instructor and help reform the training program that nearly destroyed your career." The irony was not lost on Marcus. 6 months ago, he had left Fort Braxton feeling like a failure. Now they wanted him to return as part of the solution to the problems he had experienced. "Sir, what specifically would my role involve?" Marcus asked. "You'd be working directly under a new training commander to implement evidence-based training methods and ensure all recruits receive fair and effective instruction. Your background gives you unique insight into both the problems and potential solutions." Marcus considered the offer carefully. Part of him wanted to move forward and never look back at Fort Braxton, but another part recognized the opportunity to prevent other recruits from experiencing what he had endured. "Sir, I accept the assignment," Marcus said firmly. 3 weeks later, Sergeant Marcus Chen returned to Fort Braxton wearing the instructor's hat and carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had proven his worth through the most demanding tests the military could devise. The base looked the same, but Marcus saw it through entirely different eyes. His first day as an instructor began with a meeting with the new training commander, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Reeves, who had been brought in specifically to reform the program. "Sergeant Chen, I've read your file and spoken extensively with Captain Torres about your experience here and at Camp Resolute. I want you to know that things are going to be different under my command." Colonel Reeves led Marcus through the training facilities, pointing out changes that had already been implemented. "We've instituted new evaluation procedures, mandatory bias training for all instructors, and oversight mechanisms to ensure fair treatment of all recruits." As they walked past the parade ground where Marcus had endured months of morning formations, they encountered a familiar figure. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was conducting drill exercises with a group of new recruits, his voice carrying the same harsh tone Marcus remembered. Colonel Reeves noticed Marcus's reaction. "Rodriguez is under review, Sergeant Chen. His methods and results are being closely scrutinized. If the evidence supports it, he'll be removed from training duties." That afternoon, Marcus was assigned to observe Rodriguez's training session and provide an assessment. As he watched the drill sergeant interact with recruits, Marcus saw the same patterns of favoritism and targeting that had characterized his own experience. One recruit in particular seemed to be receiving the Rodriguez treatment, a young woman named Private Martinez who was clearly struggling with the hostile environment despite obvious competence and dedication. After the training session ended, Marcus approached Private Martinez as she cleaned her equipment. "Private Martinez, how are you adapting to training here at Fort Braxton?" She looked up with the same wary expression Marcus remembered wearing for months. "Fine, Sergeant, just working hard to meet standards. I noticed you handled the combat movement exercise very well, but Sergeant Rodriguez seemed focused on minor uniform infractions." Private Martinez's composure cracked slightly. "I'm just trying to improve, Sergeant. Maybe I'm not cut out for this." Marcus recognized those words. They were almost identical to thoughts he had harbored during his darkest moments at Fort Braxton. "Private Martinez, let me tell you something. Sometimes the military tests more than just your skills and physical fitness. Sometimes it tests your ability to maintain your integrity and self-worth in the face of unfair treatment." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I was a recruit here 6 months ago, and I experienced some of the same challenges you're facing. The most important thing I learned is that your worth as a soldier isn't determined by how one person treats you." Private Martinez looked up with surprise and hope. "You were a recruit here, Sergeant?" "I was, and if I could survive it and succeed, so can you. But more importantly, I'm here now to make sure recruits like you get the fair training you deserve." Over the following weeks, Marcus worked with Colonel Reeves to document the problems in the training program and implement systematic reforms. His report on Rodriguez's methods provided the evidence needed to transfer the drill sergeant to a position where he couldn't harm developing soldiers. Marcus also began working directly with recruits who showed signs of struggling with the training environment. He developed mentorship programs and alternative evaluation methods that focused on actual performance rather than subjective assessments. 6 months into his assignment as an instructor, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Master Sergeant Williams from Camp Resolute arrived at Fort Braxton for an inspection tour. "Sergeant Chen, I hear you've been making quite an impact here," Williams said as they walked through the improved training facilities. "Just trying to ensure other recruits have better experiences than I did, Master Sergeant." Williams stopped and looked directly at Marcus. "Chen, I want you to understand something about your time here as a recruit. Your selection for Camp Resolute wasn't random or based solely on that one evaluation day." Marcus raised an eyebrow questioningly. "We'd been monitoring your performance at Fort Braxton for weeks before that evaluation. We knew exactly what kind of treatment you were receiving, and we watched how you responded to it. Your ability to maintain your integrity and continue improving despite systematic mistreatment was exactly what we were looking for in advanced operators." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You mean my mistreatment was intentional, not the mistreatment itself? That was Rodriguez's failure and a systemic problem we're now addressing, but your response to it, your resilience and character under pressure, those were qualities we needed to identify." Williams continued. "Some soldiers look great in ideal conditions but crumble when facing adversity. Others, like you, find ways to excel despite obstacles. Those are the soldiers we need in our most critical positions." As Williams departed, Marcus reflected on his entire military journey. The pain and humiliation at Fort Braxton had been real and wrong, but they had also forged him into someone stronger and more capable than he had ever imagined possible. A year later, as Marcus stood before a new class of recruits beginning their training at Fort Braxton, he thought about the unexpected path that had brought him to this moment. The base that had once seemed designed to break him had become the place where he was making his greatest contribution to military service. "Recruits, you're beginning a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about yourself," he told the assembled soldiers. "Some of you will face obstacles that seem unfair or overwhelming. But I want you to remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. It's determined by how you choose to respond." Among the recruits, Marcus noticed a young man who reminded him of himself, confident but uncertain, determined but vulnerable. As the formation dispersed for their first day of training, Marcus made a mental note to keep an eye on that soldier. The Iron Wolf program that had rescued Marcus from Fort Braxton continued to identify and develop exceptional soldiers from unexpected places. But now, thanks to the reforms Marcus helped implement, fewer soldiers would need rescuing from their own military training. Standing on the same parade ground where he had once felt so alone and defeated, Sergeant Marcus Chen smiled at the knowledge that his greatest victory hadn't been surviving his mistreatment. It had been transforming that experience into something that could help others avoid the same fate.